Hey everyone! Today I have a lovely sequence designed by the lovely and talented Bernie Clark, and it's called A Flow for the Hips. So gathering all of your props that you'll need for today, blankets, cushions, blocks, whatever you'd like to have. And then we'll get started in Balasana Child's Pose, if that's the pose that is comfortable for you. If not, just a cross-legged seated position or any comfortable position. Getting settled and closing the eyes. Take a moment to let go of anything you're holding on to that you don't need right now. Any cares or worries, just let that all float away. You are here in the right place, on time, and this hour is just for you. Start to listen to the sounds around you. Notice them without reacting. Things will happen around you, and they begin to fade away into the background like white noise. Begin to tune inward. See if you can hear and feel your heart beating. Feel the floor beneath you on the safety of your mat. Feel the temperature of the air on your skin. Feel present in this moment, not pining for the future or longing for the past. In our last few moments here, set an intention for this practice. An intention is an awareness of a quality or virtue that you wish to cultivate on and off the mat. Perhaps it's something like inner strength or inner peace. And now take 3 deep breaths at your own pace. And at the top of each inhalation, see if you can take an extra sip of air, feeling a gentle stretch in the lungs. And at the bottom of every exhale, squeeze out that last puff of air, making way for fresh new air to enter. And when all 3 deep breaths are complete, return the breathing to normal and slowly come on up to seated. And we'll get started. Our first pose for today's class is butterfly. So drawing the soles of your feet together and bringing them in towards the body as close as they will comfortably go. Allow the knees to tip out to the sides, propping them up on a block if need be, or yourself sitting up on a folded blanket or a block. And when you're ready, we'll take a nice inhale to lengthen. And on the exhale, walking the hands forward as much as they'll go. And then close the eyes. As always in this practice, if something doesn't feel quite right, come on out and re-enter, trying again. So this is not something we want to grin and bear. No pain, no gain is a thing of the past. A thing of the 80s, I think specifically. Bernie Clark always says, no pain, no pain. Simple as that. It's nice during that first stretch of our yoga practice to focus mostly on finding our edge. So that means, how much stretch are we feeling? There's always a bit of a gray area between that aha moment, as Bernie talks about, when we do feel a stretch, a little tiny one, and then an uh-oh moment when we feel too much of a stretch. So the right space is somewhere in between, and it'll depend on all sorts of things, like how you're feeling today emotionally even. If you're feeling just a little bit more, on the downside, I recommend a little bit more gentle stretch. If you're feeling a little bit anxious, you might go for a little bit of a greater stretch. Wherever you are on that scale, it's still in that gray area that we think of as gentle. There's often a moment fairly soon after we've found our edge, maybe 30 seconds or so. If you're still enough and quiet enough, you can feel the body let go a little, and a little bit more space is given. And if the body gives you that extra space, feel free to deepen the pose a little bit more. But only when the body gives it to you. See if you can soften and relax even more. Relaxing every muscle that doesn't need to be used right now. And to come out, moving slower than you think you need to, all the way out. Bring the feet forward, and then heading into some windshield wipers. So we'll bend the knees with the feet on the floor, stepped a ways apart, leaning back onto the hands, lower one knee down towards the floor. And then switching sides. So we're targeting the hip for a stretch, an internal rotational stretch. We just did an external rotation with our butterfly pose, so we're just doing a little counter pose here. Just at your own pace. And then we'll head into our next pose called Straddle. So for this one, step the feet apart as far as they'll go. Get yourself comfortable. And when you're ready, on an inhale, lengthening, and exhale, walk the hands forward. Same thing as the first pose we did, taking a few moments nice and slow to find your edge, not pushing past it at all. Bernie often talks about the 3 elements to Yin Yoga. The first one we've already spoken about, and that's finding our edge. The second element is stillness. So once we do find our edge, trying to hold still as much as possible. I know for me that's quite challenging. But if it's really challenging to hold still, perhaps you've gone into the stretch a bit too far. He also talks about 2 instances when you're in a pose and you'd want to break that stillness rule. The first is, of course, if you're in the pose too far or something doesn't feel quite right. Then super slow and gooey, backing out of it, maybe a little bit and maybe completely, and then re-entering when it feels appropriate. The second time you might want to break that stillness rule is if the pose gives you a little bit more space and you can move into it a little bit more. Often when we're holding a pose for a couple minutes, you might move once or you might move twice, sometimes a few times. There's often a moment where the body sort of gives you all at once a little bit of space. And then another minute later, you'll kind of feel that, oh, and like a little bit more, you can sink into that pose. Other than that, try to remain nice and still, even keeping the eyes closed. And softening all of the muscles that don't need to work to hold you up in this pose. Including maybe even your neck. This is where it's nice to have some blocks to lean on. Maybe even rest your head on a block. And to come out, moving slower than you think you need to, nice and gooey. Come on all the way out. And we'll head into windshield wipers once again. So leaning back onto the hands, step the feet apart, and one knee lowers down towards the floor. And switching sides, just a few rounds. And then we'll prepare for a caterpillar. So we bring the feet together, legs are extended in front of you. Be sure not to move the flesh of the buttocks away. Often it just feels better to do that, but we want to be completely on the squish. So if anything, pushing up onto the hands and then squarely sitting back down. Then we scoop the belly in and lean forward, catching your toes or your ankles or your shins, or maybe even resting your forehead on a block or stacked arms. Making yourself as comfortable as possible in this nice pose. And to come out, moving slowly, slowly. We'll head into tabletop as a counter pose. So leaning back onto the hands. Either keep the hips on the floor for a bit more gentle stretch, or feel free to lift those hips up. Just a few moments. Feeling a nice stretch in the front body this time. And then we'll prepare for shoelaces on the right side. So for this pose, come on up to hands and knees. And then cross your left knee behind the right, so all the way on the other side of the right. Step the feet apart, and then gently, very carefully, lowering the hips down to a block, or maybe even 2 blocks if your hips are a bit tighter. Only if your hips are very flexible, lower all the way down to a folded blanket or the floor. As always, if it doesn't feel quite right or you need an additional prop, come on out and re-enter with whatever props you need to make this gentle. Just checking in to see if you can relax a little bit more. Softening into those spaces, but feel the stretch. And to come out, come on forward to hands and knees, take your time, and then we'll sit back and head into a few windshield wipers. Just at your own pace. One knee lowers down towards the ground and switching sides. And then from here, we'll head forward to hands and knees and then all the way up and back to a downward facing dog. Just take a moment here to feel a nice stretch through the backs of the legs. Maybe a little stretch in the shoulders as the heart moves towards the feet. And from here, we'll continue stretching the right side of the body by stepping the right foot forward and preparing for a winged dragon pose. So right foot steps forward, back knee lowers down to your mat or something squishy, a blanket or a garden mat. And then bring both hands to the inside of your front foot. And with a long, straight spine, lowering as far as the body will let you. So perhaps that's actually still quite high up on fingertips. Or maybe it's down onto the elbows onto a block, or maybe all the way down to the ground. From here, what makes this a winged dragon is that we allow that front knee to splay out to the side as we roll over to the outer edge of the foot. And then we bring it back in again. Just a couple rounds of that, nice and slow, allowing the knee to tip outward. And bringing it back in, just at your own pace, maybe 3 or 4 rounds, whatever feels right. Just sort of organic movements, however far feels appropriate and however many times feels appropriate. The only thing to keep in mind is on the second side, we'll want to do about the same amount of movement. And when you've had enough of the winging, you can keep the legs parallel and just hold. And to come out, we'll step it all the way back to downward facing dog. So take your time, maybe walk it out a little bit. And then we'll prepare for shoelaces on the left. So lowering to hands and knees. This time we'll cross the right leg behind the left, step the feet apart, and lowering back to a block or maybe 2 blocks, or maybe it's all the way to the floor. Keep in mind the second side may be different than the first. As always, take the same amount of care and attention for each and every exercise. Be sure the knees are 100% happy with you. If not, come back out and re-enter a little bit differently, adjust as needed, utilizing as many props as you need. Checking in, see if you can soften a little bit more. And to come out, coming forward to hands and knees, take your time, unwinding, unraveling the legs. And then we'll head into some windshield wipers again. So sitting all the way back, step the feet apart, knees are bent, and one knee moves down towards the floor. And then the other knee, just alternating at your own pace. And then we'll come all the way up and back to a downward facing dog once again. So all the way up and back. Maybe walking it out for just a moment. And then we'll head into our winged dragon on the left side. So left foot steps forward, back knee lowers down to something squishy or your mat, and then both hands to the inside of your front foot, and with a long straight spine lowering as far as the body will allow you. From here, rocking onto the outside of the left foot, that front foot, allow the knee to tip outward. And back, just rocking back and forth at about the same pace as the first side. 3 or 4 times. And when you feel like you've finished with your winged dragon, just holding steady at parallel. And then we'll step it back all the way to downward facing dog, maybe walking it out a little bit. Getting that circulation going a little once again. And then come on back to seated. This next pose is super fun. It's called half saddle. And if you have 2 bolsters, that might be helpful, or 2 big pillows or cushions. And what we do is sit on one bolster and have the other one on top of the second one. Right leg is forward, and the left leg is tucked in like hero pose with the shoelaces part of the foot onto the floor. And then we lean back as much as available. So now that you know what it is, you can remove the bolsters if you don't need them, or adjust the bolsters and blankets and pillows and things. This is definitely an awkward one, but it's so good for us. It's actually probably one of the better poses for us, partly due to the fact that we're stretching so many things all at the same time, so it's a really good multitasker. It's also one of the poses that feels the most awkward most of the time for most of us when we start yoga, but it loosens up quicker than most of them. So not overnight, of course, but if you were to do this pose every day for a month, you would find it increases in flexibility a lot, like a lot. And it makes our posture better. And when our posture is better, we can utilize our muscles better to get stronger, more effectively, more efficiently. It's just a great pose. So softening into it as best as you can. If you are all the way down onto the ground and you're not using any bolsters and you're quite flexible, you can bend the knee with the foot on the floor. It's just a little bit more of a stretch. Otherwise, keep the leg extended down on the ground. And to come out, good luck. Just kidding. We reverse course, but with all honesty, this is the part where we remember we're mere mortals. So come on out. And then we get to do it again on the second side. So if your props fell apart while we were exiting that posture, set them all back up again. Left leg forward extended, right leg beside you as in hero pose, and then head on back. Take all the time that you need. I think sometimes we feel so rushed to get in the pose so that we hold it for the precise length of time, but it really doesn't matter. It's better to move slowly, get into the posture at your own pace. And if you're in the pose for 1.5 minutes instead of 1:45, that's fine. It's all good. Doesn't really matter. More important to get there at our own pace, at the pace our body really appreciates. And once you're in, really trying to relax and soften as much as possible. If it feels awkward, just know that's totally normal. If there's any pain, we need to come out and maybe try again. I mentioned this is a really good multitasker. I'll just fill you in on a couple of the things we are working on. One is ankle mobility, of all things. This is why I love yoga. We work on the ankles. And even the feet. You might feel the tops of the feet stretching a little bit or a lot of bit. You may feel a stretch in the knees. And just know that is okay. I know it can be a little bit daunting when we feel anything in the knees. We definitely don't want to harm them in any way. But a gentle stretch and a sustained stretch is actually very good for the knees and can prevent injury in the future. You may feel this pose in the hips as we are internally rotating the thigh bone in the hip socket. And one of the most important places you may feel the stretch is in the low back. And it's not so much of a stretch as it is compression. And the lower back, similar to the knees, we often feel apprehensive, but as long as it's kind of a dull ache and not a sharp pain, it's really good for you. It can build bone density as we compress and hold, not compress with friction repeatedly, but we compress the lower back bones together and hold them. That is what increases our bone density and reduces back injury in the future. And to come out, again, reversing course. If it feels awkward, that's totally normal. Take your time, take your time. Once you're out, our counter pose is child's pose, just for a little while. So making your way all the way to a child's pose and then settle in. And to come out, moving nice and slow. And then we'll make our way all the way to the ground, laying all the way back, preparing for twisted roots. So on your back, we'll bend both knees, crossing the right all the way over the left. We'll shift our hips over to the right. So scooch them over to the right and then send the knees over to the left as you keep your right shoulder pinned down to the ground. Your knees may wish to rest on a block if they don't make it all the way to the floor without that shoulder popping up. And settling in. One of the props in yoga that isn't super common is a sandbag. And because that shoulder likes to pop up, it can be helpful to place a sandbag on the shoulder to help keep it down to the ground. For our last few moments, see if you can melt a little bit more. And to come out, scoop the belly in and press the low back into the floor, unraveling and unwinding. And then we'll repeat on the other side. So once you're all squared up, left leg crosses all the way over the right. And then we'll shift the hips over to the left. And then send the knees over to the right, to the floor or a block. But be sure to keep that left shoulder down to the ground. And if you are using a sandbag, you can place the sandbag on the left shoulder. And to come out, scoop the belly in, press the low back into the floor, unraveling, unwinding, and then hug both knees into your chest, gently rocking from side to side. Maybe even doing a few circles with your knees. And then we'll prepare for Shavasana, final resting pose. So feel free to put on a sweater or have a blanket, whatever you need to feel cozy. And when you're ready, laying all the way back. And if your back needs a little extra support today, feel free to bend the knees with the feet on the floor and allow the knees to tip in towards each other. Otherwise, extend the legs on the floor, arms along the sides, palms facing up, and close the eyes. If there's a lot of noise around you, start to listen to those sounds. See if you can hear the sounds far away, maybe even outside the room. Then hearing all the sounds inside the room. And through all of those sounds, see if you can hear your own heart beating. Just allowing those sounds to be there without distraction. And relaxing the toes, the ankles, the knees, hips, and all the way down the legs. Soften through the belly and the full length of the back. Release through the neck, the shoulders, and all the way down the arms, letting the fingers softly curl. Softening through the face, softening around the eyes, and even the muscle between the eyes. Just letting it all go. And if you'd like to stay a bit longer, feel free to do so. Otherwise, starting to wiggle the fingers and toes and roll the head from side to side. Then reach your arms above head on the floor for a big stretch, feeling totally refreshed. And bend your knees in one at a time. And slowly roll over to the right side. And allow yourself to pause there for a few moments. As you come back, and slowly start to press yourself all the way up to a comfortable seated position. And when you get there, palms facing up on the knees, inhale, sitting up tall, and exhale, softly close the eyes. Taking those final moments to thank yourself for showing up to your practice today and taking care of you. And slowly open the eyes. Namaste, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you next time and have a really good rest of your day.